Today, we're going to be diving into prototyping 101. Should be more like a tiptoe and a splash. We're going to talk about these concepts so that y'all can better understand and work with it and test your ideas. So, once again, prototyping is going to allow you to take your designs and to test the ideas that you have, to share them with others. If you are a designer developer, or if you're working with developer, or if you're working with stakeholders, you need to show them something that works. You need to show them something that is much more than just a static or a flat screen. And that's why we have prototyping capabilities in Figma. It helps you bridge that gap a little bit sooner if you don't have development chops. Sometimes you just need to test something out. So once again, my name is Miggy. You can find me on twitter.com as @Miggy. I'm also joined by Alex Figma EDU. We run these workshops every month to just support the education community out there, whether you're in a higher ed or a boot camp or any structured learning that you may have. We're going to be covering prototyping 101. I'm going to cover basic prototypes. Then we're going to cover scrolling prototypes, and I'm going to throw in sticky scrolling in there as well. It's a relatively new feature in Figma. I know a lot of you are looking for more dynamic scrolling. We're going to show you how to do that. We're going to show you previewing and sharing prototypes. We're going to cover interactive components as well as motion and video. So the motion is going to be sprinkled throughout the lesson. At the end, we're going to talk a little bit about video and then see where we go from there. All right. So this file, once again, you can copy, you can duplicate it, and you can go through the pages the same way that I am going through them as well. I'm going to click on over here on the left panel. You can see I have my pages. There's another page called Basic Prototypes, and this is where we're going to begin our lesson. All right. So once again, prototyping is a way for you to test your ideas. All prototypes in Figma begin with a frame. To create a frame, you'll notice on the upper left-hand toolbar, there are region tools. When you click on the region tools, you'll see 3 different types of regions: a frame, a section, and a slice. The ones that are most essential to programming are going to be frames and sections. Frames being the quintessential thing that you need to create to use a prototype. So when you do that, you can also just press the F key on your keyboard. I'm going to draw out a frame here. So everything begins with a frame. Now, with that frame selected on my canvas, I'm going to come over here on the right, and you can see in the properties toolbar. So over here, we're in the design panel. You'll see that we have this frame option. That is a drop down that will give you the ability to choose any number of devices that you can be prototyping for. You can set your own width and height for that frame, but if you want to use a recommended viewport size, you can choose it here. All of these are using the true viewport sizes of the devices, and that's going to be important for when you're designing and for developer handoff. Here, I'm going to choose, let's say, an iPhone 14, 15 Pro, and you see the second that I create it, I automatically have a sense of scale on my canvas. I'm going to zoom in. And for those of you that are unfamiliar, I'm just scrolling in. So I'm going to hit Command or Control if you're on Windows and use the scroll on my wheel. If you have a laptop, you can use your touch and pinch gestures to zoom in. And there we go. I have my frame. So creating a frame, this is where prototypes begin. Let's begin to talk about creating prototypes and what they are. So typically, you're going to navigate and you're going to create an interaction between 2 frames. So here I have a start frame and I have an end frame. And I'm going to create a very basic shape in this start frame. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to come over here to the left. Over here, I have my shape tools. I have a rectangle. I'm going to draw out just a very simple rectangle. This is going to be a placeholder for my button. Oftentimes, when I'm prototyping, I use very basic shapes just to start to get a proof of concept of my prototype. It's like a prototype of a prototype. So here, I'm going to select that object, come over here to the right where I have the fill. I'm going to make it red. And there it is. So now I'm going to select this. and I'm going to copy it. And over here in the end, I'm going to make that just a little bit bigger. Right there we go. It's bigger. It's the same exact object. What I've done is I've copied, right? Command C or Control C, and then Command V or Control V, copy paste. Y'all know that from Google, right? You know how to do that. I'm going to paste it over here in this end frame. And same thing here. I'm going to change that color just so you can see that there's a difference. So what I have here is I have two frames and I want to create a relationship between them. So here in this start frame, I'm going to select it. I'm going to select my object inside of the start frame. And now I want to create a connection. So when I click on that plus button from that first frame, I'm going to go to the next frame over. I'm going to select it, come over here to the prototype tab. When I click on that prototype tab, you'll see that the canvas changes a little bit. So we went from being in design mode to prototype mode, and you'll see things change and behave a little bit differently. The keyboard shortcut to go between design and prototype mode is Shift and E. So when I press Shift E, think of it, just we're shifting over. Shift E, it's going to swap between design mode and prototype mode. Now that I'm in prototype mode, when I select this rectangle, you'll notice a little plus icon. That plus icon is going to allow me to create an interaction from that first frame to that next frame. And then we're going to talk about how to control that interaction. So the way that we are creating this is not that different than how it might be created in code. So you'll see here we have an interaction, right? We have an on tap. When I click there, I can change the type of interaction. There's many different types of interactions. You can have on tap, on drag, while hovering, while pressing. You can even trigger an interaction with a keyboard or a gamepad. You can pair Bluetooth game controller such as a PS5 or like a Switch controller and actually use that to control your prototypes. Companies like Amazon and Netflix actually use this to mimic remote control interactions. There's also mouse enter, mouse leave, touch down, and touch up. So if you think about the way that you interact with your computer, we're going to change what's going to happen based off of that. So here we're going to on tap. So we're going to make it behave just as if you were to tap on your phone. So on tap, we're going to navigate to, and we're going to go to this end frame. So you see what it's doing is it's looking for that frame, and then we can choose how it goes there, right? So here, I'll walk you through that one more time. So let's delete that. I'm going to walk you through. So we have an interaction. We have the behavior event. It's going to navigate to another frame. This is one of the most common interactions that you're going to work with if you are designing something like a website, or if you're designing an app where you have different screens and you're navigating between them. The transition is going to be, how is it going to go from one to the other? Oftentimes, when you're in a website, you click on a link and you just see the next page. That's an instant transition. Sometimes when you're on an app, you click on the button and then you see the whole screen move over, and that can be a move transition. So we're going to determine what that's going to look like, what that's going to feel like when you test that prototype. Here's the duration. What is the distance of time, right? How quickly is it going to move, right? We generally want that to be under a second if it's going to be a pretty quick transition. We choose how it accelerates or deaccelerates. I'll show you all my favorite type of ease, and then you can see a preview of that interaction. And the state management, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So once again, I am in prototype mode. So here I have two frames. I created the frames. I put a shape into each one. In prototype mode, I can create this interaction, this noodle. So you see I have one on the canvas. I'm just going to delete that. That's a fake one. That's just to kind of remind me to show y'all how this works. So I can drag this little arrow. You see the arrow kind of going, and it's going to pick a destination. It comes over here and it snaps on that other frame. So there we go. It snaps onto that other frame, and you'll see on tap, navigate to, and then we're going to end. We're going to go to that end frame. That's the frame that we decided. If that frame was named something else, that name will show up right there. Right now, this is going to be instant. Let's see what that work looks like, and we can try that out. So when I click on this blue rectangle, we're just going to navigate back, and you'll see on tap, navigate to, we're going to go to that start frame and we want it to be instant. So we've just created a relationship between this object inside this frame, causing it to go to the next one. And then from this one, going back to the first one. So I'm going to preview this over here. See my little example. This is a starting point. The starting point, if it wasn't there, let's see, let's delete the starting point. Let's see. Where's my starting point? Is it going to allow me to delete my starting point? Oh, I think they moved it. Here we go. So I'm going to select the frame. Here's the flow starting point. I'm going to remove that. There's no flow starting point. You can't preview it. So I can select the frame, come over here in the prototype panel, and I want a flow starting point. So where are you starting this off from is really important. So I'm going to just say example one. Now there's a preview button. I'm going to click on that preview button and it's going to show me right here in the editor, and I can get a sense of how this works. When I click from that first one, it goes to the next one. You see how that happens? That's wonderful. Now I'm going to click on that first interaction again, and I can change how it behaves. Let's say instead of an instant transition, I want to instead move in, and we can see what that looks like here in this preview. So you've probably used an app on a mobile phone before where you click on the menu and the menu overlays the current screen. That's what's happening here. And we have an ease out transition. I'm going to leave that ease out, but you'll also notice here I can choose how it moves in. Let's have it move in from the top. So here we go. It's going to move in from the top. So we've clicked on that noodle. That's where those interaction details live. So that noodle right there, yes, we call them noodles at Figma. We call pictures that have all the noodles pasta pictures, as a matter of fact. So I can preview this, and now you can see that it fades in, right? And it's instantly going back. So let's change that transition one more time. So we're going to move in. Let's try a slide in. Let's see what the slide in looks like. And let's have it come in from the right. Right? So here we go. Let's click. The slide in is kind of cool because you see the previous screen darken and also move to the left. Now, what we might want to do is then have that transition back also match. And we need to think about where this came in and how it's moving. So here we go. So the shortcut for preview is Shift Spacebar. So someone just asked, what is a shortcut for preview? That is Shift Spacebar. So once again, Shift Spacebar, we can preview that. I can even leave this open and make some changes. Let's say here, instead of that instant transition, I want to move it out, and we're going to have it move back out. Actually, no, we were using slide out. So now it's going to slide out, and now you'll see comes in and slides out. Maybe we want to make sure, we're coming down. So there we go. We want to make sure that there's a good sense of psychology at play here. The brain wants to know where the thing went and where it's coming back from. So that's how this transition is playing out. Now, I'm gonna jump right into some advanced stuff really quick. We're also going to preview a smart animate transition. I'm going to talk about these as well. So instead of a slide in, we have smart animate. And now what smart animate is going to do, it's going to look at the two objects in both of those frames. So here in this first frame, I'm going to look, it's called rectangle 5. And over here I have rectangle 5. Let's make it give it a more meaningful name. How about James? Okay, we're going to call that rectangle James. We've officially named our layers. So as long as James is going to go to James and the layers are matching correctly, then it should animate. So let's select both of those arrows. I can change both of those arrows at the same time. So I'm clicking, dragging, selecting both of those arrows, and you can see that there are now drop downs that are demonstrating a mixed behavior. And what that means is, one is instant, one is move in, one is smart animate, and one is push. So let's just have them both be smart animate. So what it's going to do, it's going to look at the difference between those two shapes. It's going to look at its size, its position, its scale, and its color, only certain properties, and it's going to cause a nice little animation between them too. So now, instead of doing a all-out transition where the whole screen moves, it's attempting to tween between the two objects that it recognizes as being the same. So here, one more time, I click that plus button. There we go. We got a little transition. Now, what I like to do instead of using an ease in or ease out, I like to use a custom Bezier. I like to make a nice ease in, ease out. It's what I refer to as an S curve. Sometimes I like to type in the numbers specifically. So here it'll be, let's say 0.8, comma 0, comma zero point 0.2, comma 1. And what that means is that dot is 80% over at 0, and that dot is going to be, oops, let me move that back. Let's see, 0.8, comma 0, do, 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 0.2, comma 1. So it's controlling that dot and that dot to create this nice little S. That's my favorite kind of motion curve right there. So it's a bit of a cheat sheet for me, and you get this nice snappy animation. If I was to change the timing of it, let's make it really slow, right? Let's see what it looks like really slow. Let's do 1200 milliseconds. So it's about 1.2 seconds. You'll actually see how slow 1.2 milliseconds really feels when you see a transition happen. So there we go. So hopefully you got a good introduction to this. Once again, you can duplicate this file at Figma community. Alex can share that link, so then that way you can see exactly what this file is and use this as practice to start this up and to see how it works. Oh, by the way, if I were to go back into design mode and I move the location of that button and I preview this, you'll see that wherever that button is, that's where the transition is going to happen. Even if I was to change a property over here, like rotate that on the right, you'll see that it's going to do everything that it can to try to animate between those. So Smart Animate is a fun way to learn some of those basics and to get a sense of how you might eventually design micro interactions in Figma. Okay, so next up, I have a little example here, and I want to showcase a newer feature that we have here in Figma. So I'm going to go to prototype mode. I'm going to show you this example. In this example, I'm taking each number. And so each number, when I click on it, when I tap, it's going to navigate to the next screen. It's going to go sequentially, right? So when I click on one, it's going to go to two. When I click on two, it's going to go to three. When I click on three, it's going to go to four. And I highly recommend that as you're beginning Figma, you make these simple prototypes to help you understand how the navigation and how the controls work. I love making these types. You'll see that I have a little move-in animation and it has a little S curve. So we can preview that right here. So I'm going to click 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, prototypes can get kind of large. You're going to have a lot of screens. You're going to be clicking around. You're going to be navigating them. And one thing I want to show you is that here in this inline preview, there's this little 3 dots menu. It's an ellipsis menu. It's called the overflow menu. You're going to click there, and there's this option. It's called follow active frame. This is new as of last fall. So when I click on this, what it's going to do is as I navigate, it's going to show me where on the canvas the current frame is. So by demonstrating it this way, if you have a larger prototype, you'll have a much better sense of where you are navigating to, and it'll help you troubleshoot any issues that you may be having. So once again, you click on the ellipsis tool and you're going to choose follow active frame. And so long as you're in this preview pane, you can kind of see where you are at all times. Okay. So once again, these 4 frames, they follow the basics that we've already encountered. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you another way to create a navigation within your interface. So down here, I've created a component out of 4 circles. Actually, let me delete it. I'm going to create this from scratch just so y'all can see how it's done. I'm going to draw a rectangle. Oh, I'm going to start with rectangles. I always kind of start with rectangles. It's a thing that designers do. And I'm going to select a color. Here we go. I'm going to go to my design panel because you want to make sure in the design mode when you're designing, I'm going to add a stroke value to this. Let's make this stroke value 3. And I'm going to come up here. what designers typically do, we don't start with circles, we start with rectangles and then make them circles. So here in the properties bar with this rectangle selected, I'm going to round that corner all the way out. Let's say, it's going to be bigger than its height. So let's say an 80 corners, and that's going to make it a little circle. So I have one circle. I'm going to duplicate that and make another circle, right? So I'm going to hold down the Option key, hold down the Alt key if you're on Windows. I'm going to click and drag it while holding down the Option key. So I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have 4 of these circles. Now I'm going to select this circle. I'm going to press the eyedropper tool. I'm going to use the eyedropper tool. It's the I key on your keyboard. I'm going to press the I key. It's going to give us a little eyedropper tool. That second button, I'm going to make blue. I'm going to select that third one. I'm going to press that I key, the eyedropper tool, and you'll see it kind of shows me up here in the top right, the current color that I'm selecting with a little bit of zoom. And then this last item here, I'm going to press that I key and we're going to choose that purple. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to make a non-linear navigation. So this way, I'm going to create a navigation that can go to all of these sections in a non-linear way, much more dynamic. I'm going to select them all. So these are all now selected. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to create what is known as a component. A component in Figma is an element that you're going to reuse again and again. So we're going to create a main component and then we'll create copies of it. And those copies are dependent on the main one. So if you make changes to the main one, right, then it's reflected in all of the copies that exist on this page. So we're going to create this as a component. You're going to see it's called component 1. I can name it by just double clicking on the name, right? There we go. I double clicked on it. Super easy to name. You'll see that name reflected and changed over here in the layers panel as well. Let's name that. I'm going to call this navigation, right? Now, when you're building out and designing a real app, you're going to be using, realistic buttons, things that are going to be more intuitive for the user. But when you're testing this out and you're learning this for the first time, these are wireframes. I'm making a prototype to test my idea. So we have this main component here, right? It's called navigation. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to copy it, Command C, Control C if you are on Windows. And now I'm going to select every one of the frames that I have here. I can click and drag and select them all, or I can select that first frame, hold the Shift key, select the next frame, keep holding that Shift key, press the third and the fourth. So that's going to select all 4 frames. There's many different ways to do this. I can even come over here to the layers panel, hold the Shift key and click all 4 at the same time. So the important thing is that they are all selected. Now that they're all selected, I'm going to paste, right? Command V, I'm going to paste, Command V, paste. And you can see that the navigation has now been placed into every single one of these frames. If I look over here in the left, there's my frame 4, the navigation instance has been placed there. Number 3, the navigation instance has been placed there. So each one of those instances, each of those frames has a copy of that instance. And if we look on over here on the left as well, we'll see that 4 diamonds. The 4 diamonds is the main component, right? The single open diamonds, those are the copies. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to move this all the way down, and you'll see that as long as they're selected, we're moving them all down together and they all remain on their frames, right? That's going to be key. So you'll see that, like, if I make a change here, right, if I change that to dark blue, you see it reflected in all of them. But I'm going to hit Command Z. Let's undo that. I just wanted to show you how the main component then works with its instances. So what we're going to do is a little bit of magic right now. I'm going to select this navigation component. I'm going to go to my prototype pane. And instead of trying to wire up all of these individually, right, it would take a lot of time because I have to make this one go here, this one go here, this one go there. I'd have to go 3, like this one goes to 3, this one goes to 3, right? That could be a lot of work. But because we have this component instance relationship, I only need to wire up the main component with all of those navigation items, and the rest is going to be done by Figma. So I'm going to double click in. I'm going to select that first navigation item and I'm going to drag a noodle to 1. So there we go. We see on tap, we have our little navigation. It's going to remember the previous interaction that I just performed. So like, let's say we're going to do our move in, right? We have our move in animation, and we don't want that to be so long. We want that to be about 300 milliseconds, right? We want quick, snappy transitions. So same thing here. I'm going to drag the second one. And remember, you must be in prototyping mode to create these relationships, these interactions. So there we go. On tap, navigate to 2, right? Let's go here. On tap, navigate 3. And let's choose number 4. On tap, navigate 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we click on this first one, we have that interaction, right? Now, when I click on this first frame, you'll see that it's all been wired up because these are all references to here. And if I were to test that out, when I click on blue, it goes to blue, and I click on yellow, right? Goes to purple, goes to red, goes to blue, goes to red, goes to yellow. So we have a much more dynamic way. So you can create a main menu that is a component, right? That main menu can be a component, and then that can drive all of those interactions. I like explaining this in this way because it's very visual. And as you start thinking about how you might make an app, or as you start believing and thinking like, okay, I can make it this way, you start realizing that these shortcuts exist to speed up your workflow. So once again, I'm using the main component, and also, these different frames. So I'm using this, and just a copy of each one is there. Now, the one cool thing that I can also do is I can actually come here and I can make some changes to this property. So let's say, sorry here. Does the component need to be on the same page, or they can be on separate pages? That's a great question, Heather. If I was on a different page and I want that component, because I created it in this file, if I go to my assets panel, you'll see we have my basic prototypes. There's my component. Boom, there it is. Now, in order for it to work correctly, you will need it to be like on that same page, but the component itself can be anywhere. So you can wire it up on this page and then create copies of that, and that should also work. However, in order for this behavior to work, yes, it does need that relationship. Otherwise, the instance can be overridden, right? And then you can copy and duplicate those instances, if that makes sense. All right, great question. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next section. Here, I want to just hop back and talk a little bit about a very basic prototype. I love using Figma for presentations. It's because I can draw out these frames and I can design them all up. So these are some example frames that I have as a template for myself when making presentations. Now, the way that I can easily navigate between frames while I'm editing, I can press the N key and it's going from one frame to the next, right? So I can see, okay, here's a frame, right? I press the N key and it's going to the next frame. N key, and if I press Shift N, it goes backwards. So N, 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 Shift N, Shift N, Shift N. I can also, if at any point, if I want to go to a frame, I can just double click and I can go to it. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is that if you want to create a very rudimentary presentation, and if the idea of creating interactions between every single slide feels daunting, right? I want to make this into a nice presentation. If you have no interactions whatsoever, when I go into prototype mode, we haven't shown full prototype mode yet. Up here in the top right, you'll see a little play button for present. So as long as you organize slides from top left to top to bottom, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, as long as you arrange them visually on the canvas in this way, when we go to present mode, right, I can present these slides and I can navigate these slides as if it were a presentation. I even have options here to hide the Figma UI. Now you'll see the shortcut here is Command \. It might be Control \/ for y'all. If I hide that, I can see that I can now use this as a presentation link, and I can even copy that sharing link, and other people can see what I see. So I can copy that sharing link and then people can see me as I'm navigating through this as well. So I saw somebody ask how to create these as PDF. Let's say I have all these slides here and I want to generate them as a PDF. Now the PDF capabilities out of Figma, they create larger files because there's some issues with fonts. But if you just need a quick and easy PDF, you can go here to the main menu. You go to File, Export Frames to PDF. You do that, and then it creates this as a PDF. I can open this up, and you can see this right here. We have this now, this entire slide deck as a PDF. So that was a great question, and hopefully you'll use this. You can find it helpful. All right. So once again, N key will go forward. We'll go back. And you can also press, I believe, you can also press function, like function key, right and left if depending on the keyboard that you're using. I know I cover a lot of keyboard shortcuts in Figma. If you are at all just kind of like keyboard lost, you can always hit command forward slash or control P or command P, right? And that's going to bring up this little menu. It's called the quick actions menu. It's also located over here in the top left, the quick actions menu. You can type in keyboard shortcuts and you'll get a whole listing of different keyboard shortcuts for zooming, for viewing, for accessing the tools. And I know many of you are coming from locations that are outside of the US. So if you go to layout, you can actually change the way that the shortcuts are mapped to your keyboard. So Chinese, Danish, Finnish, Korean, Norwegian, Spanish, you can actually change that. So then that way the keyboard shortcuts are going to be much more comfortable for your fingers based on your keyboard. All right, cool. So next, we're going to head on over and we're going to talk about an entirely different type of prototype. Let me bring my chat back. Here we go. How do you preview the prototype with interactions? To preview the prototype with interactions, here I can select this frame. Same thing. I just hit play. And now I'm previewing the prototype with interactions. And here you can see I'm clicking and I'm tapping. And actually, this is going to give me an idea because I'm seeing something that's happening here that I might not want to happen. And it's great that you asked that question and I can now remedy it. So when I go to prototype mode, you'll see that this frame, I can actually change the settings. I can come into show prototype settings. And right now it's choosing the default that I'm working with, an iPhone Pro Max, but any device that you're working with, you can actually change that device. So you can see a frame of it to get a sense of what it might actually look like. You can even change the background. Right. So when you go into that present mode, you'll actually see the device that you're working with. Next, there's something I forgot to talk about. With these interactions, there is this option called animate matching layers. What that means is when the transition takes place, if there is something like that global navigation that persists across all of those frames, right? So if I click that, and even here on all of these transitions, so I can select, there's one transition, this two transition, this three transition, right? I can select them all and I can choose animate matching layers. Now, what that's going to do is make sure that when I'm testing this, it's not going to move the navigation. Now, you might notice too that it's like changing up the background a little bit. Let me go here to prototype mode. Let's go to present. And that's because the background is matching, right? So what you want to do is you might want to change up how you create those backgrounds. You can put in a background color to inform that and change that there. But I'm going to move on to scrolling prototypes. Let's head on over to scrolling prototypes. Simple scroll is probably one of the easiest things that you can do. Well, let me bring up my chat here so I can see what y'all are saying. All right, cool. So simple thing that you can do here, the simplest thing that you can do when making a prototype is just make it scroll. I guarantee you it'll like wow people because we're designing for devices that have such limited real estate. demonstrating a scroll in a prototype is going to be really helpful. So I'm going to select this frame here. And with this frame selected and in prototype mode, you'll notice there's this option over here in the right prototype panel that says overflow and has scrolling. So when you click on that, you can choose vertical scrolling. And what that means is if there is any content that extends outside of that frame. So here I can select the frame. Right now, it has a property in the design panel called clip content. If I unclip it, you can see that this frame has a lot more stuff outside of it. If I want to clean that up, I just say clip content. So you can see even when I select this, that there's all of these objects here. And because they extend outside of that frame, in prototype mode, it'll give me the option to apply overflow vertical. Now, what that means is when we preview this, I can scroll this up. So I can actually scroll with my scroll wheel, or if I click and drag, you can see. And there's even like a little bit of a little snapback if I drag this all the way down. And you might also ask yourself, well, Mig, wait, there's this like black bar at the top. What's that? If you want to have an element not follow the scroll, right? Just select it and go to the prototyping pane, and you can change its scroll behavior. So everything is going to be scrolling with parent unless you tell it to be fixed. If I turn off that fixed behavior, when I scroll this, it's going to go with the content. If I want that to be a menu or a persistent navigation at the top, I can instead choose for it to be fixed. And when it's fixed, it will stay. So let's create a very simple frame and show you how to make scrolling content. I'm going to press the F key. I'm going to draw the frame. I am going to go over here to my design panel and choose a different type of frame, or might as well just stick with it. We're already doing the iPhone 15 Pro Maxes. There we go. And I'm going to draw a rectangle, right? So I have one rectangle. Let's have two rectangles. Can this scroll? I don't know. Let's see if it'll scroll. When I select the frame, go over to my prototype panel. Once again, scroll behavior, no scrolling. Oh, we want to be vertical. If I choose vertical scrolling and I don't have overflow content that goes outside of the frame, it's going to give me a little warning. It tells me for that to work, there needs to be content that's bigger than the frame. So here I'm going to follow suit with that. Let's make these a color so y'all can see them in the back if you're sitting all the way in the far back, right? I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to hit Command D. Command D is a duplicate. So you see we have a bunch of these rectangles here. When I go back to the design panel and I select that frame, I can unclip that content. You could see it's all there. Now in prototype mode, I want this to scroll. So I can choose overflow. Let's set it to vertical. And now I can add a flow starting point. Now that I have a flow starting point, I can preview that and I can see it scroll. Now, if you want that content, let's say you want that content to be horizontal and you want it to scroll horizontally. I'm going to show you a quick trick for that. I'm going to select all of these objects. I'm holding down the shift key while I click them. So I'm selecting all of them. You can see them over here in my layers panel, rectangle through 2 through 8. I'm going to come over here to the design panel once again, and you'll see this little option for auto layout. I don't know if you're familiar with auto layout. It's kind of great. What it's going to do, it's going to put all of these rectangles into a frame for me and keep them arranged together. So I'm going to press auto layout. You'll notice over here it says frame 3 and there's all my rectangles. And I'm just going to call this, AL container. Right. And what's cool about this is I'm going to switch these from being vertical to horizontal in a snap. So now that it's auto layout, you see that there's these options. There's this whole little pane of options here. There's a lot more to auto layout that I'm going to be covering today. So make sure you check out our YouTube for auto layout videos, but I'm going to make this horizontal layout. There we go. Make them vertical, make them horizontal. Just saved a bunch of time. So with my frame and in my prototype settings, you'll notice that there's no vertical overflow, but instead there's horizontal. And so now when I turn this on, you could see that it'll be horizontal scrolling. Cool. So as you start to go from like wireframes and shapes to actual UI, these are components that I have here. You can start to create more interesting things, and you can start to realize your vision, right? So start with simple shapes and then gradually start to add text and imagery and icons. So here what I have a component, not that dissimilar to the navigation component we made earlier, and except this one, I'm going to set a horizontal overflow. I'm going to show you how it works, and then we're going to make one. So when I place this here, I have the horizontal overflow for these cards, and I'm going to have another copy of that. And here you'll see I have an overflow for one and for another. So a component is going to give you the ability to just target an area itself for scrolling, right? So it's not just the whole frame scrolling, but we're going to have a nice little condensed area for scrolling. Um, Even here, I can select on that whole frame, I can set vertical, right? And what's cool is I can kind of scroll up and down, and I can scroll these horizontally. I'm going to show you how to make that. So here in the file, I'm going to go to my assets panel, and we're going to come down to scrolling prototypes, or where is it? Do I not have this component here? I think I don't. Oh, that's a bummer. Okay, so I'm going to copy one out of here. Let's grab that one. And I mean, like, we could do this with shapes. Let's do this with shapes. So I'm going to draw a rectangle. Right. So this is my object that I'm working with. I'm going to duplicate a bunch. Let's make rounded corners. Let's go to the design panel. Let's add a stroke. We're trying to get a little bit more higher fidelity. So let's say we have a bunch of these cards, right? I'm going to duplicate that by holding down the Option key. You can also just press Command D or Control D. It'll make a copy. It'll put it right on top of itself. There we go. And I can, duplicate that, Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, or Control D. I'm going to select them all, and we're going to make a component just like we did previously. So we have these elements, they're all the way across. We're going to come up here to the top, the 4-diamond icon, and we're going to create a component. So this component, we're going to call this our horizontal scroller. There we go. We got our horizontal scroller. And this is going to be a main component. And we're going to put it into this frame. And this frame is going to be the container for this. Now, what we want to do is we want this to scroll left and right. But notice the purple frame is all the way around it. So we need to define a smaller area, right? So I'm going to hold down the Command key, and I'm going to drag this over. It's the Control key if you're on Windows, and you'll see I could change the scrollable visual area for that component. I'll show you that one more time. I select this frame, and you'll see these 4 little squares on the edges. Those are the absolute bounds of that frame. Now I'm going to hold the Command key. If you're on Windows, it's a Control key. And while I'm holding it, I'm going to drag this over to the right. So we just have this little area. And what that's going to be, this is going to be kind of like our target area for the scroll. It's going to scroll left and scroll right from here. It's not dissimilar to having that frame. Even if I go here, I can clip the content and you can see what's outside of it. And if I clip it and I hit that Command key or Control key, you see I can make more of it visible and available, right? So I'm going to drag this all the way over to the left. I'm going to unclip that content, and I'm going to go to my prototype settings, and you'll see for the component, I have overflow behavior, right? And so you're calling that a frame, isn't a component, right? This is a component, this is a frame. So here I'm going to choose horizontal scrolling. Here's on this component. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it into my example scroll. Let's get a copy of it. There we go. Into my example scroll. Right. So there it is. And you see there's a little bit of overlap here. Now I can even have a copy of this, right? Let's duplicate that down. And when I preview this, you see I can scroll them now horizontally, and based off of that preview area, right? Let's see what that preview area looks like. Let's add a stroke to the the component, you'll see there it is. Once again, hit Command key and you can control the viewable area of it. This way you'll just see where it's showing up here as kind of like a, like this is where my scrollable area is. That's my viewable window. And so as I drag these left and right, you can see I could drag this up and then those will drag left and right. So those are the contents inside of that component. Now you want to have fun. I can move this one out of the way. Oops. Let's move this one out of the way. There we go. I'm going to select my example scroll. Let's unclip that content. We could see them there. If I wanted to populate these rectangles with images, let's say I want to make a little gallery, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to choose File, Place Image Video. You'll see that the shortcut for me is Shift Command K, right? Place Image Video. And here, you're probably not going to see this at home, but I have my UI show up and it's going to ask me to pick some images. And so I grabbed some images. And now those images are going to be charged up with my cursor. So there we go. There's my cursor. So click, 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 click. So now I've populated those shapes with those images. So if I was to clip that once more, I can now see like the little gallery of images that I have. So in a previous workshop, if you've joined my workshops before, all images are just fills on shapes. I'll show you that one more time. Here we go. So once again, let me hide the stroke on this to create more of the illusion, right? So we have this example scroll. And what I'm going to be doing is overriding the fill on these component instances with image fills. So come up here, File, Place Image Video. I'll show you another way to do that. Command P or Control P, say place. There we go, image or video. I'm going to select the images from my file browser on my operating system. And then I'm back here and I can now place those images into that gallery. There we go. And now when I preview my example scroll, right, I'm previewing it, I could see it in the device. It might take a second for the images to load, and there they are. Those beautiful, beautiful images have a nice little gallery. So just by scrolling, you can get a really high fidelity prototype that you can use. Okay, so I know we're running short on time, and there's some other concepts that I want to get into. Here, I'm just going to demonstrate this concept. There is a sticky scrolling playground file on Figma's community. I'm just going to show you how this works. Basically, inside of this, there is a frame, and this frame is set to position sticky, right? And so here, there's another frame, and it's nested inside of a frame, right? So, and then this one is set to position sticky, and this one is also set to position sticky. Everything else is just occupying this frame. And what's cool is when I preview that, let me preview this better. I'm going to turn my device off. There we go. My device is set to none. So here now, when I preview this, imagine this as being like a website. When I scroll, that content will stay, but other content will move. So the key factor here being that this element is nested inside of this frame, and then that's nested inside of the larger frame. So this frame here, give you a sense, it clips right about there. And then inside of that, there's an element, and it's basically going to follow its top point down to its bottom point, and it's using some padding to kind of determine whether or not it's going to stick. Unfortunately, this is a beginner workshop, so I don't want to go too much into it. But if you head on over to figma.com/@Figma, there is a file, what is referred to as a playground file, that'll walk through sticky scrolling prototypes. Here it is. I'm going to take a copy of that link. So if this interests you, head on over to that link. Then you can check out sticky scrolling prototypes and go through all of the steps to make that happen. I'm going to move on to our next topic, interactive components. Once again, interactive components are going to be a little bit different than your traditional prototype. So in your typical prototypes, we're going from frame to frame to frame, right? So it's frame to frame to frame. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a prototype that's going to be much more dynamic. I'll show you an example here. Let's imagine you have this frame with a, let's preview this here with like little draggers, right? And you could turn them on and off. If you imagine and prototyping this with frames, you need so many different permutations of these that, it would be impossible to make. So an interactive component is going to allow you to create kind of like like an embedded prototype. So it's like a prototype within a prototype, and it's really fun for animations. So I like to make these animations here, right? So what I have is I have just a single frame, but that single frame has these little nested interactive components that have their own kind of timelines, their own animations that are taking place. I'm going to show you how to make one of those. All right, we're going to make this switch, and I'm going to show you how that works. So let me delete that. I'm going to delete this. We're going to start from scratch. I'm going to draw a rectangle. Here's my rectangle. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to round out those corners, right? So let's say it's a 120 by 120. And if my corners are 120, right, it's going to be perfectly round. I tend to prefer using rectangles as opposed to outright ellipses. Then I'm going to create another rectangle and I'm going to send it behind that first one. I'm going to just drag it down behind that first one. So this up here, this is like our dot. We're going to change the color of this one, make it a little bit darker. Here we go. And also just round out those corners. So if the height is 200, the rounded corner, it could be also 200. And there we go. We have a little switch, and Figma will automatically snap it to the middle. There we go. So we have our start frame. Now I'm going to select this. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose frame selection. So this is going to make a frame around this object. Let's make this nice and even. That's 499 wide. Let's make that a good 400 wide. There we go. So I'm going to select this whole thing. I'm going to right click and choose frame selection. And that's going to put a frame around the artwork that I created directly on the canvas. Let's double click that. Let's name this and let's call this off, right? Now I'm going to select that frame and press Command D, Control D if you're on Windows, duplicate. Now we have another frame, right? And it's cool. Put it right where we wanted. Let me undo that. I'll show you. Command D. There it is. This one's going to be on, and I'm going to move this to the right. Right, there we go. And I could change some of its properties. Let's make that green. Let's make this like extra green. There we go. We got on and we have off. And it's just a rectangle and two rectangles that have very rounded corners. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a quick prototype. I'm going to drag this circle, the little noodle over here. So it's going to go navigate to on. We're going to use Smart Animate. All right, there we go. Let's make it very fast and say 250 milliseconds. And instead of an on click, we're going to choose on drag. We're going to use a drag interaction. And as long as the object is going in the direction of where it needs to go, that's how it knows where to drag it to. Same thing, I can connect that one back, and we're going to choose on drag. It keeps my settings from the previous interaction. So we're good. So we have, and I can even move this around. And if I move this around, you'll see it keeps the noodles. So we have on and off, right? And I can preview this, I have on and off, on and off. But now we want to make this reusable. We want to encapsulate it so it can be used again and again on multiple frames. I'm going to select them both. I'm going to come up here and I am going to create a component set, right? So I selected these two frames. They're not components yet. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to create component sets. And now you'll see they're all purple. And what that means is this is a component and this is a component, but they're two main components that have some differences, that have some interactions. So if I was to create a frame, let's go to the design panel. Let's choose an iPhone 15. Here we go. And I was to copy, this little bean that I have here. By the way, if it's too large and I want to scale it, the scale tool is different than just resizing it. You can press the K key for the scale tool, and you'll see the scale tool pop up over here. If you're a person who likes to click on things on the canvas, you'll see the scale tool is over here under that. I can make this smaller, so I can say 0.5. So you can make that scale it smaller. You don't want to just resize it. You want to scale it. So there we go. We have one. I'm going to hold down the Option key, the Alt key if you're on Windows. Let's drag that down. We got two, Command D, 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 D. Right, we got a bunch of these. So here we go. They're aligned. And now when I preview this frame, go to prototype, create our starting point, you'll see that we have more of a dynamic approach to this, right? So what's cool is that these are interactions. It's a prototype that's encapsulated. It's packaged up that can then be used on a single frame to create multiple states. In the same way that all of these, if you look at their interactions, you see instead of using a click or a drag, we're using after delay, and an after delay is going to create these animations that are going to allow the object to rotate. And I'm actually doing some fun things here. I'm only rotating this point to this point, this circle to that circle. So I'm not truly like rotating it all the way around. I'm only changing it by like 20 degrees and using a linear ease, right? Let's see here. You'll see a Smart Animate Linear, and that provides for a nice little animation. And if I was to duplicate these, if I was to put a bunch of these on the canvas, when I preview that, they're all going to do their thing. It's like this pre-packaged animation. I can press the K key and scale it, right? Make that bigger and preview that. Now look at that. We have so many more. And that's what's kind of great about this. So if you wanted to play around with these, draw a frame, copy one of those in, right? Copy one of those in, right? And these are all kind of pre-packaged ones. And so when I hit that space bar, right? Oops, I didn't do this one right. Let's copy the thing. There we go. And you'll see it kind of plays. And if I press the K key and scale it, right? It's bigger. We move it and it's going to play. So a couple other things. Yeah, here's a whole set of interactions as an interactive component. I can choose the starting point. So when I select it on the canvas, I could change it to step 2, step 3. I know we got to wrap up pretty soon here, so I'm just going to finale out of here in just a bit. But here we go. 1, 2, 3, right? And it starts. Let's restart it. It starts from this point. Because we're selecting it, we're coming over here to the properties panel and choosing its starting point. So same thing. If this were a frame by frame interaction, right? It's just playing through the frames. If we make it an interactive component, then we can copy it and add multiple, to the canvas. I'm going to press the K key to scale it and then even change the starting point. So, in my intro workshops, I like to cover some advanced topics as well. What I want you to do is think about the types of fun that can actually be had with Figma and the types of aspirations. When I work with students, typically I like to create these more fun examples and then kind of walk our way back to the more serious ones. I know I mentioned we were going to talk about video today, video prototyping. Basically, you can just place a video onto any shape the same way that we place those images. And you can pause and play video. When you select the video, go to the prototype panel and you could choose autoplay. You could change various properties. I have an entire video on video prototyping. So I didn't want to call this out because video prototyping is free for education. So if you have an education team, you have full access to video prototyping, and it's one of my favorites. All right. So I know we have a bunch
Hey,
of
Maggie,
questions.
it's Alex. You have a bunch of questions. I tried to put a few of the ones that I think were the most common at the top, but we only have time for about 2 to 3 questions. So up to you on which one you address live. And
All
then
right.
everything else, maybe we can address on Twitter or in a future video.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, again today. So is on tap the same as on click? On tap or on click will change whether or not you're using a touch device or a web device. So if you're using in your prototype, you designate it as like laptop, it'll say click. If you designate it as iPhone, it'll change to tap. So that is going to be the main difference between those two. So it's based off of what you set as your preset. So those are both of those. Boop. All right. I recently had some issues connecting my wireframe. Sometimes the connections don't work properly. How do I fix that issue? It can be any number of things. Usually, if I'm having difficulty with my connections, it's usually best to start over. Like if you get this like really big mess and you just need to say, hey, I call connection bankruptcy, I need to start over. You can right click and you can remove the interactions. So here, let's say I select this frame. Where's remove interactions? There it is. Remove interactions. So you can remove interactions and it'll clear the interactions from the selection that you currently have. And then what I would do is just start simple again. Like I know sometimes it could be daunting. What I highly recommend is breaking up your prototype into smaller chunks. So using these flows to represent smaller chunks for your prototypes, highly recommend that over going through very large prototypes. How do I
Hey, Mick,
hide the
there's a
layout
few at the
grids?
top too that you might want to address.
Okay,
Yeah,
is there
those
a way
top
to
two, please.
add padding to the elements that you're wiring together? For example, you're wiring an interaction from an icon. You want to add some space around the icon so for people to click on. So it's all in the way that you create that icon. So typically when icons are created, the icon might only occupy like that much area. So the component that you generate for that icon can then be the hit state as opposed to, taking an icon and then have prototyping with that, wrap that icon in a larger frame. And that way that frame can be and can serve as the larger hit area for your interaction. What is the most efficient way to make an interaction on basic prototype? Move in either from left or right, depending on their position. So I mean, it's a matter like we try to create the tools so then this way you can have as much intention as possible. I know sometimes you just want to move fast and you need to think about what it is that you're trying to communicate. So sometimes you don't even need transitions if you're working with someone a bit more sophisticated. But as you're trying to develop complexity or communicate an idea of your prototype that requires more of that sophistication, then it's up to you to add in the details that you feel are most necessary to communicate what it is you're trying to communicate. What is the smoothest transition between two screens where the status bar same, but the tab bar will change section? Once again, that is a matter of basically coming in and choosing the option to animate matching layers. You want to make sure that you turn that on, but that everything that is going to be transitioning is going to be named differently or not transitioning, be named differently. So any layers that match will be handled here. But typically, when you're working with Smart Animate, such as something like this, you want to be very, very specific about what it is you're animating and what it is that you aren't. Things that don't match up or aren't named correctly. If I was to go in here and see we have James going to James, if this wasn't James and this was instead Jane, when I hit play, right, you'll see that it doesn't smart animate anymore because it doesn't recognize those as the same thing. But if I go back and I change them both to match, right, then we'll see it'll provide that transition. So understanding what it is that you want to transition, what's going where, curating that and being intentional about it is going to be integral for you to have a successful animation or a successfully smooth animation or prototype. That being said, I want to make sure you all give us feedback, let us know how we're doing and how we can additionally support your learning journey. Let us know in the feedback form what you would like to see next, what you think was helpful, and what you'd like to hear from more. Make sure you check out figma.com/events for future monthly education workshops. Really appreciate you all being here today, whatever time it is where you are. I know some of you are in time zones where it's pretty late. So once again, really appreciate you. By you coming and attending these workshops, you're supporting us to produce more workshops. So really appreciate you all. Make sure you drop that feedback. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, evening, morning. And as always, happy designing.